Good afternoon and welcome to Alberta Agriculture and Forestry's Cows and Chaos webinar series. My name is Dean Dick with the Ag Info Center, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. A couple of notes before we get started here. First is this webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a link to the webinar in an email tomorrow. Secondly, if you would like to ask a question anytime during the presentation, please type your question into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. With that, and we will take the questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Amie Peck, who is the Stakeholder Engagement Manager with the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and she's going to talk about telling your story. So Amie, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dean. Thanks for having me do one of these Cows and Chaos webinar series. It's a big privilege. And thank you to everybody that's taking time out of your day to attend with us. As Dean indicated, I'm going to go over, some tips for advocacy. It's going to be specific to the beef industry because that is the industry that I work in, but really it's applicable to any part of agriculture. So please feel free to adapt as needed. I'm just trying to, advance my slides. My keyboard wasn't working. So just going to go over really quickly the organization that I come from, the program, what we do, and then I can go into some recent success stories that we've had, and then talk about how you can apply that in your own situation. So I am the manager of the Public and Stakeholder Engagement Program. This was created out of the National Beef Strategy, and really we are working to increase public trust in the Canadian beef industry, specifically in our production methods. And so we do this through two main focuses, which is both issues mitigation, but also through proactive content. There's 3 of us in the program. So myself that manages, we have an engagement advisor named Stina, and then as well we have a technical advisor, Dominique. And we work in partnership with other industry staff and provincial associations, breed associations, so that we're all advancing the industry together. And so our first area of focus, as I discussed, is issue mitigation. And so this would really be when a negative article is published in the media. Depending on the size and scale, the public and stakeholder engagement team takes the first look at it. So you can see here from the icons, what do we do when presented with an issue? Well, first things first, we try to examine it from all angles. So what is the media saying? What is the public sentiment? So looking at comments on various social media channels and what have other industries had to say about this issue. And then we really go and we consult both the existing research and the experts that we have access to. And through that consultation, we can then draft these key messages. And when you're drafting these key messages, it's also important to outline potential risks. So there's sometimes risks involved in responding to an issue. Sometimes you can draw more attention to yourself and make yourself a bigger target by responding. So you really need to make sure that the pros outweigh the cons for your response. Then we would determine the best outlet. How are we going to get this message out there? Then we would share the key messaging and sort of monitor the response to that. And I'll take you through some examples of issues that we've worked with, just to give you an example. So the one I'm going to go through here is the Weather Network. So this past summer, in July 18th, they shared a video, and it was on both their Twitter and Facebook platforms, and it was titled, "Cutting Back on Beef is Necessary and Easy to Do." And this was a video produced by them. So pretty quickly after it was uploaded onto their social channels, started seeing quite a bit of negative comments. Because as you can imagine, who is closely monitoring the weather? It's farmers and ranchers. That's sort of their target market. So right away they were taking offense that this outlet, which advises on weather, was telling people what to do with their diet. And so our first response, was to promote more positive messaging on our various social media channels. So we were putting out, beef is good for the environment, videos, and encouraging, other ranchers and beef advocates to share that message as well, because we find most often that putting this positive messaging out there is a really good response tactic when you maybe don't want to draw that much attention to the issue. But it was becoming fairly obvious that that level of response was not going to be enough. So the next thing we did is we contacted Pelmorix, which is the Weather Network's parent company, and went right to the CEO. His name was Sam Sebastian, and requested a meeting. And he was very open to that. And so a call was set up between Canadian Cattlemen's Association and the CEO. And he was unaware that the video had been posted to their social media channels. Somebody in his position, he's not really involved with the content calendar, but he was very surprised that something of that nature was published. And so the outcome of this meeting was an agreement, to share research and conservation information specific to the beef industry. So he said, there's a lot of environmental benefits that go along with cattle ranching, and we'd love to share some more information with some of our third-party partners, like Ducks Unlimited Canada or the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And so they were very interested in that. It was a positive meeting overall. It was a really collaborative approach, and we looked forward to working more with them. And so on Twitter and other social media channels, there was a lot of coverage of this story. So here are just some examples of, Ag More Than Ever and other people kind of covering this issue. And it was also written about in the Calgary Herald and the Edmonton Sun. So, what I'd really like to point to on this example is that the negative video, about cutting back on beef was not really being seen by a large majority of the public. It wasn't out in the general public. People were not discussing it. It was largely targeting criticism from the ranching community. But the response to that issue was then seen by a far larger public. So like we said, Calgary Herald covering it, and the Edmonton Sun. And so this is an example of sometimes, using an issue to promote your positive messaging. So, if we were to go and pitch a story to the Calgary Herald and say, we'd love to tell you about, sustainability advances in the Canadian beef industry and all these, benefits to the environment that this industry provides, they might not be that interested in covering that story. But if you add a little conflict in, if you add a little drama, all of a sudden they're really interested in hearing your key messages. And so being open to turning, what looks like an issue into an opportunity to share that message with more people. And so that's what we do with mitigating issues. There were other examples that happened this year. Some would be, releasing of Beyond Meat products, and not so much in the products themselves, because consumers deserve to have choice, but in any advertising that contained misinformation about the beef industry, whether that was a lower environmental impact or better for you nutritionally. Those things are false information, and so we definitely try to target that as well. But a large part of what we're doing is trying to create connections. And I've got two pretty good examples here for you. So the first is the 3% project. And 3%, their goal is to reach, as it says, 3% of the Canadian population. So they were going through high schools, doing high school presentations, and they're really talking about climate change mitigation and what this next generation can do to combat that. So he was traveling across Canada, and we had one of our ranchers was in his presentation, I believe it was in Ontario, and contained a lot of accusations towards the beef industry that definitely weren't representative of what happens in Canada. And so that was obviously not what we wanted to see. So we reached out to Stephen Lee and invited him, would you like to learn more? Would you like to go on farm, see some beef operations coast to coast and just learn more? And he was very open to that. He hadn't had a ton of exposure to beef operations, so this was really a chance to get his boots on the ground and learn more. And so set up various farm tours. He did some in the Maritimes, and he came out to Alberta, and he toured a farm here that's has bees on their operation as well, and went to the fallen timber meadery. So it was just a really neat experience for him. And through that, he changed his presentation. So he was talking about the value of cattle on preserving native grasslands and the carbon sequestration potential that those grasslands have, as well as maintaining, biodiversity on those landscapes and preserving habitat for all of these species that are at risk. And so this picture is him and a coworker, and this is actually at Stephen Hughes' ranch in Longview, one of the locations that they went to go, learn more about. And so since then, we've heard from some more parents of children that have been in the 3% Project presentations, and they still have some more extreme views on climate change and the direction of the beef industry. And so this one is really important to remember that even if you're moving the needle a little bit, it's still a win. So to have a company that before was saying, only negative things about the beef industry, to then say, grass-based forage systems are important for mitigating climate change, that's an important step further. And we, can continue to further this conversation and try to get them, seeing all of the benefits of the entire beef industry. But, just knowing that any win at all is really good for our industry. And, not everybody is going to come around 360 degrees. But the next example I have is a little bit closer to that. So this is the Royal Ontario Museum. And they had this display set up, and so you can see it says cattle ranching and agriculture are destroying native grasslands. And so of course this is not the case in Canada, quite the opposite. And so again, the same approach was taken. We reached out, we created a connection at the ROM. We said, this is really not representative of the Canadian context. We'd love for you to come meet some beef ranchers from across the country, and learn more about how we're actually really working to preserve grasslands through cattle grazing. And they were open to that. They said, okay, actually they have this program with students that are, it's mostly videography, and could those students come out and interview some ranchers and some other interested parties and create a video about it? And we said, absolutely, we would love to help you organize that. And so these students came out to Alberta in July of last year. And so, they met with local ranchers, they interviewed people from Ducks Unlimited Canada and the Nature Conservancy of Canada, as well as cows and fish. And they spent, I believe it was about 2 weeks here, and they lived on some of these ranches with the family, and they had some experience riding. So they were able to get on a ranch horse and help move cows and really be immersed in the experience. And so you can see here Shelby Grassick, that was one of the participants. She says, the past couple weeks have been an adventure with long days, beautiful landscapes, and unforgettable memories. So happy to have had the opportunity to learn about Southern Alberta grasslands and to have met the people who are working hard to preserve the land. So a really great takeaway from Shelby. And so after they edited and finalized these videos, they held an event at the ROM. So you can see in November of 2019, and it was called The Power on Your Plate. So creating connections through sustainable food choices. And they showed these 2 videos and discussed how beef could be a part of a sustainable food system. So again, really just a huge change from the messaging that they had originally. And along with these 2 videos that they produced, Shelby also wrote a blog post. And so this is kind of towards the bottom of her blog post, and it says, so you can eat beef or not eat beef, that decision is yours. But before you judge a rancher, farmer, or anyone for that matter, get to know their story. Chances are you'll learn something new. Become more connected with the food that you're putting in your grocery cart. If it is Alberta beef, in all likelihood, you can feel good about contributing to the conservation of the most endangered ecosystem in the world. Speaking of course about native grasslands. And so, we just love this. And of course, I believe it should say if it is Canadian beef, not just specific to Alberta. We're doing great things all across this country. But really a great message from somebody who's coming from downtown Toronto and seeing the value in the conservation efforts that these ranchers are having. And so those videos that they shot are now going to be a permanent addition to the Biodiversity Exhibit at the museum. And so, this is an example of a 360-degree turn, from cattle are destroying native grasslands to cattle are, vital to maintaining grasslands. That's just a huge win. And so, of course, we need to really celebrate when that happens. It's amazing. And that came through, creating connections and allowing people to see firsthand, what ranchers are doing. But, like we said before, you have some small wins and some big wins, and they all deserve to be celebrated, and it's all moving in the right direction. So now I'd like to move on to some proactive projects that we've been working on. So originally when the public and stakeholder engagement program came to fruition, it was called issues management, and it was really just involved in like it sounds, mitigating issues. But we knew we needed to get more positive information out into the public and to the media more often so that it wasn't always us being defensive about our industry. So the first program that was created is called Beef Advocacy Canada, and you can find it at the URL there below. And so this provides information, training, and support to people who are interested in being advocates for the Canadian beef industry. So you just go online, sign up, and it takes you through 3 modules. So just learning how to discuss common questions about the beef industry, how should you approach being asked about, are hormones safe to use in beef production? Same with antibiotics. Learning how to address those questions, but then we also added this new social media module. So you can go on there and learn how to have conversations on social media. So if you're someone that maybe didn't grow up, with Facebook or Twitter, or you just, you feel a little awkward using those platforms, this is a really great way to learn how to engage with people through social media. When is a good time to respond? When should you not respond? And then how to go about that as well. So if you're interested, I really encourage you to sign up. It does take a couple hours to go all the way through the program, but it's really thorough and we've heard great feedback from it. People just get a lot from the program. And so once you've graduated from beef advocacy, you're then invited to join what we're calling the Content Corral. And so Content Corral is a centralized library of beef advocacy content that's designed for social media. And this is just to amplify the voice of the Canadian beef industry. So we have beef advocates that use the Content Corral. We have industry that has access to the Content Corral. And so it's videos, it's articles, it's infographics, and they're all organized by subject matter. So this is really meant to take the time and the effort that beef advocacy requires and just eliminate it as much as possible. So for example, we have a lot of people, maybe they're on Twitter quite a bit, and they'll see a post on Twitter that says, reducing your meat consumption is the best thing you can do for the environment. And they say to themselves, well, I know that's not true. Not only is it very low greenhouse gas emissions that you would be eliminating, it also doesn't take into account all the environmental benefits. But to go through the research and compile your key messages and have a really nuanced response to that, it takes time. So that's where the Content Corral comes in, that you can go in, and if you're saying, I want something, on climate change, and I want to find something specific to, the impact of reducing items from your diet and showing that it's minimal. And so you can find that on Content Corral. And there's other things as well. If you're interested in just sharing beef recipes, there are those things. There are charts and graphs that show where Canada's GHG emissions come from. So again, when somebody says cattle are responsible for large GHG emissions, you can say, no, here's the graph, and it shows Environment Canada source data. So things like that, we know that a lot of people want to advocate for the industry. It's just having the right tools in front of them. So Content Corral helps with that. As well, it also allows you to schedule your posts. So for provincial communications people, if they can go on a Monday morning and schedule all of their posts for that week, just be on the platform for 10 to 15 minutes, pick out a post a day, schedule them to be put out once a day, perfect. It's not going to take them as much time. And so if you're interested in Content Corral, I have got my contact information at the end of this presentation, so feel free to send me an email. But really, once you go through the beef advocacy program, then you're automatically sent a welcome email to Content Corral. As well, this year we created a new microsite. And so, on the Canadian beef website, we really want to keep that for, recipes and nutrition information. And it was becoming a little too bulky to add, more questions about where does Canadian beef come from. So we said we need an accompanying website that just deals with that question. So we've done up a booklet, and it is called Where Does Canadian Beef Come From? And it's on digital format here. And then there's also sections beef and the environment, beef and the Canadian economy, etc. And we're going to be adding a animal welfare section as well to this microsite this year. So this is a really great resource if you have someone who has questions about beef production in Canada, and you're wanting to send them somewhere, send them to this microsite. So you can see at the bottom, it's raisingcdnbeef.ca. It is also in mobile form, so you can use it on your cell phones or on your tablet. And we've had really good success using this at trade shows. So you can just put it on your iPad, and somebody says, I've got questions about, again, antibiotics used in beef production. Say, great, I'll take you through the antibiotics and hormones section here on the microsite, and I hope it answers all of your questions. It's set to about a grade 8, grade 9 reading level, so really it's meant to be used by a broad range of audiences. Also a great tool for classroom use. I'd also like to talk about Guardians of the Grasslands. I hope that most of you on the webinar have heard of this short documentary, but if you haven't, it was produced in partnership with Ducks Unlimited Canada and the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And it was shot on location at the beautiful Waldron Ranch Grazing Co-op in southern Alberta. So really, we went out to the Waldron and we were shooting an informational video for them. So when you drive along, Highway 22 and you see the Waldron spanning both sides of the highway down there, there's no signs really telling you what you're seeing. And the value of all of that native grassland held in, preserved and all in one block essentially. So, they had approached us, said we want to do an informational video. People can find out more information when they stop, and see the Waldron sign. But out of this, we were doing interviews, again, Ducks Unlimited and Mike Roberts, the manager of Waldron Ranch. And there's just this larger story to tell, and that is the value of cattle on grasslands, replacing bison as the keystone species. And that is the economic basis for maintaining these landscapes. And if you were to remove cattle, the devastating effect it would have for the plants and animal species that call it home. And I think what really hit home for both my team and the videographers that created this piece is that so few of us know that, the grasslands are actually one of the very most endangered ecosystems in the entire world, as endangered as the coral reefs and the Amazon rainforest, with really 20% or less remaining in Canada. So it is really important that we get that message out there. It is a message that I don't think a lot of Canadians are aware of. And so that's where the success of Guardians came through. And so, like I said, it's a short documentary. It's 13 minutes in length. And so we have been pushing it out. So we've done some screening events, and you can see here, these were all held last fall, kind of our premieres across the country. But what I'm really proud of is, if you look on the right-hand column there, is just that all these screening events were held in partnership with other, NGOs or, government organizations, really showing support for the Canadian beef industry. And our message is stronger when it's done in collaboration with other companies. So obviously Calgary, Ottawa, Nature Conservancy and Ducks Unlimited Canada were partners. But then if you look all the way down to this event in Toronto, we were heavily trying to target food influencers and dietitians. And so this was held in collaboration with Beef Farmers of Ontario, but also the Ontario Sheep Farmers and Farm and Food Care Ontario. And you can see the little asterisks there. We invited the Weather Network to attend as well. Come and learn more about the Canadian grasslands. You said you were interested. And so that's just a great example of continuing to engage after an issue, that you're continuing that conversation. So for Guardians of the Grasslands, we created a website, and you can see the URL at the bottom there. So guardiansofthegrasslands.com. And if you go online, you can request to host a screening. And we've had a lot of success with this. So the film was launched in mid-September, and since then we've had over 150 different requests to host a screening, and we estimate that over 25,000 people have seen the film so far. And so, these are just some of the upcoming screenings in February. Not all are public events, so they can't be published. But really the message is getting out there. So, University of Ottawa and University of Waterloo. So it's being seen, not only in universities and not only with partner organizations, so forage and rangeland associations and soil conservation associations, but 4-H clubs and elementary schools and everything in between. And so you can see here on February 20th, what's really exciting is that we've even had a request as far as South Africa to view the film. That there's grasslands all over the world, and they all have in common a grazing species that was the foundation of that ecosystem. And so one question I have quite a bit is, how come this short documentary isn't just uploaded onto YouTube? Why isn't it publicly available? I want to be able to share it. And the reason for that is we really want this short documentary to reach external audiences. And what I mean by external audiences is those not involved in primary agriculture. That's how we need to reach people that don't know the value of cattle on grasslands. And so it's such a thing that we struggle with. And so came up with a solution. Let's try to submit the film for film festivals, and that will really ensure, that these are people that we're not generally targeting with our messages. And we've had great success so far. So the bottom of this poster, you can see just 2 of the 4 film festivals that we were selected for. One was in Montreal, that's that Digital Graphics. And then the other 3 laurels at the bottom there was the Alternative Film Festival from Toronto, where it won Best Director. And as well, we've been chosen for a film festival in Vancouver called Elements Environmental Film Festival. And that's really exciting. That's going to be held at the TELUS World of Science. And that's our key market that we want to see this message. And we're really excited that they saw the value in the documentary and didn't dismiss that it was just about the beef industry, that there is this value of cattle on grasslands. And as well, we've just been accepted into the Toronto Short Film Festival. So the eligibility requirements of all of these film festivals stipulate that the film can't be publicly available. And so that's why it's not on YouTube as of yet. But all of the requests to screen that we get through the website, we approve all of them. So even if it's just a group of friends, you know, if you just want to show it to your family, just send an email in through the website. But if you have other ideas for other conferences or events where you think it would be really impactful, we're always into that, making sure that we're trying to amplify those messages whenever we can. So this next slide is just showing you, you know, the requests for screenings thus far of those 150. And so we really expected them, you know, a lot of them to come from the prairie provinces, you know, and Alberta is by far the front runner. But really interesting to see that it's going all the way across Canada. We've had quite a few screenings in Ontario. It's going to be screened at the Maritime Beef Conference in PEI coming up in March. So, and then all the way through the United States as well. So the message is being shared widely, and we're really excited about that. Wanted to share with you a screening event that we just held on February 11th, which was Canada's Agriculture Day. And so we screened Guardians of the Grasslands at the Sustainable Events Forum. And this is in at the Fairmont Royal York, in Toronto. And this is where event planners come and they're learning about holding sustainable events and conferences and how beef can be a part of your menu, even if you're being environmentally conscious, you know, and especially if you are. And so this was just a really great reaction we saw on Instagram, where she says, "I'm so lucky to be in a screening of Guardians of the Grasslands, a Canadian documentary winner educating us on how cows save the Canadian grasslands. As a vegan, I have a very different view after watching this. This was powerful and I feel ignorant as a vegan." So, you know, the power of being able to change people's minds, and the message isn't, you know, you need to eat meat. It's great. If you choose to eat meat, you can feel that we are contributing positively to the environment. As well, this was from our Toronto screening event that we talked about at the end of November, where there was foodies and dietitians. So this is an Instagrammer, and she says on the right-hand side there, climate change, biodiversity, and the role grazing livestock play in protecting our natural landscape. Did you know that the relationship between grasslands and cattle create a positive and measurable impact on the environment and well-being of people? Did you know that the loss of grasslands create major environmental issues such as flooding and loss of wild habitat? We all need to help improve sustainability by making smart/good food choices and reduce food waste. And so, you know, she's even using hashtag guard our grasslands. And so we're creating advocates out of places we didn't necessarily expect, by using messages that we know this target audience is going to feel strongly about. So of course, you know, protecting the environment and endangered ecosystems, and linking that, you know, back to the value of cattle. And so, you know, that's what our program does. That's what public and stakeholder engagement does. Those are some, you know, the approach to issues, and show you how we worked through one issue that we had, and then some of these proactive projects. So now I really want to tailor that to what does that mean for individual advocates? How can you go out, you know, and feel like you're making a difference? And so I've compiled some tips here. So this is research from the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, their 2019 public trust research. And so it's just going, you know, who do Canadians trust in the food system? And year after year it is showing that farmers and producers are the people that consumers trust the most. That's where they want, you know, the information about the food system to come from. And so it's about leveraging your position as a primary producer to, you know, already use that trust that consumers have in you. Also want to talk about, you know, where it's best to use your time. And I love this graphic. This is about, you know, vaccine acceptance or vaccine deniers, but it is very applicable to agriculture advocacy. So, you know, if you replace this vocal vaccine denier with instead an animal rights activist or a staunch vegan, you know, the probability to change their mind about, you know, meat consumption is very low or zero. So you don't spend your time trying to convince those people either, the nutritional or environmental benefits of beef, because the chance of there being a win is just so low, so don't spend your time and energy there. And then you can see that orange circle, they call it the vaccine refuser, so this might be the meat refuser, still a low chance to change their mind. But if we look at the yellow, that they're calling a hesitant individual, and I would call it the same thing if we had somebody who was, maybe beef hesitant, or somebody that felt, they enjoy eating meat, but they feel guilty about it, because they've heard this wrong information that it's bad for the environment. Now we have a higher chance to change somebody's mind. They're more open to learning the information that we have to share. And so that's really where you want to spend your time and your energy, is with these people that are open to learning more, rather than, struggling with someone that you're never going to have a win with. And so I would say first part of advice is talk to your audience. So, there's really no such thing as the general public. There are different sections of people. There's moms, there's foodies, students, environmentalists, and even a term like millennials is too broad. If you say, oh, I really want to target millennials, well, is that younger millennials? Is that older millennials? Is that early adopters? So really defining who your audience is, who you can best reach. And so when you're looking at who you're going to reach, most effective is to do it through shared values. So, where can you connect with people where you have something in common? And a lot of very successful beef advocates that we see are mothers. And there's that shared value. I care about what happens to my children, what I feed them. I want them to have safe, nutritious food. And I believe in the value of beef. And that is then easier for another mother to see the value of that message. So, connect on the fact that you are parents, or, do you love hockey, or is there something else that you share in common, that then you are even more of a trusted voice towards convincing someone. And here, it might not feel like you're moving the needle, but every effort counts. Like we talked about, make it a smart effort, make sure you're targeting someone where there could potentially be a win. And as we say, sometimes it's a small win and sometimes it's a large win. All that matters is that you're trying to move it forward. Another that I'd like to talk about is, conversation, not education. So addressing people on their terms, making sure that we're not using technical industry jargon, even saying, beef producers, people are much more likely to understand, beef ranchers or beef farmers, but just making sure that whatever you're trying to communicate, that you're looking at it from their point of view. What is the language that they would understand? But, listening and understanding is as or more important than what you have to say. So I would say we used to always hear, about educating the consumers, and I just don't think that that's a good approach to have. Nobody wants to feel, that they're being educated. You're having a conversation and you're listening to them. Their points are just as valid as yours are, and as people that purchase our products, it's so important that we listen to their concerns and address them. And we see here, facts are important. You need to have the facts and the research to back up what you're saying, but facts alone are not going to change anyone's mind. We need to wrap them in a story. So where we've had really great luck with changing someone's opinion on the beef industry is when they meet a rancher and they hear their story. So those two students from the ROM, when they spend time on these ranches in southern Alberta, living among these families, they're living their story. And so that's how they come to be advocates. They go, wow, I really see the value in this. And so it's really great to tell your story. It's great to connect on those shared values, but where we're going to have the best impacts is by showing someone, creating those experiences for people to see a beef operation for themselves, and see, a cow-calf operation or see a feedlot and learn how it works. those people that experience it firsthand are much more likely to become advocates for us rather than just hearing other people's stories. But both are important. If we can't show them, let's make sure that we tell them. And so really that's most of the advocacy tips that I have. I know things are a little bit different than maybe what you heard. It's important to tell your story. It's important to tell facts. Let's make sure that we're connecting through shared values and creating experiences on farm for people that are just removed from this industry. But I do have time to take a couple questions. As Dean said, if anybody has any, I think you can use the chat function at the bottom. And I'll just put up my contact information that you can take down as well. So if you have any questions that you don't want to maybe publicly ask, you can feel free to please shoot me an email. You can find me on Facebook, also through Guardians of the Grasslands, and as well on Twitter.
Excellent. Thanks, Amie. That was a very informative presentation. Lots of good information and some tips for doing some advocacy. So we don't have any questions posted yet. So as Amie said, if you want to ask a question, please use the box on the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel and just type it in, and then I'll read it out for Amie. One question I've got for you while we wait for some questions to come in is, how active is your group on like scouring social media for these types of questions and sometimes that type of thing? Are you active there on a regular basis, or is it? I guess I'm just trying to figure out, are you outgoing and actively searching for these things, or do they kind of come to you? How does that work?
That's a great question, Dean. Sort of two ways. One is we are constantly monitoring social media. So not only will we have, certain Google words that we are always searching for, but also just constantly on most of the social media platforms. So we do have that, and we're investing in some more technologically advanced social listening tools so that you would have upwards of 200 keywords that you're searching every single day, and then just scouring through the latest, published articles, and then also social media conversations, just to see what conversations are happening out there. But then we also weigh when we're going to respond. So we kind of have a response matrix, and it depends on the risk factors. Is it going to be potentially more risky to respond, or is there benefits that outweigh those risks? So we always go through that with all issues. But as well, we have a lot of very active producers on social media and on the internet every day, and so we do get a lot of things sent to us as well. And so if you do come across an article that you think is damaging towards the beef industry, please feel free to also submit that. We have a straight email address for that as well, and it's concerns@cattle.ca. Yeah.
Good, perfect. We've got some questions coming in now. So first one, do you have any specific messaging or strategies specifically related to feedlots and their environmental effects, so on and so forth?
Great question. So one thing that we knew coming out of our projects this last year, specifically talking about Guardians of the Grasslands, is that we had really focused on largely cow-calf grass-based systems. And that's because we see that as sort of the easiest win. It's very hard for people to go and see those systems and not come back an advocate. So knowing that we want to focus on feedlots this year, that is our focus. And so we are doing a project currently that's going to be linking food waste to feedlots. So looking at not only byproducts of industries that are upcycled through cattle, but also just produce and other non-edible human foods that are then, instead of going to the landfill, are diverted to feedlots and upcycled into protein. So that is our focus for this entire year. You can look forward to seeing some more on that. And so that's really tying, what are the environmental benefits of feedlots? Well, a huge one is upcycling food into human nutrients.
Interesting, thank you. Next question. For someone who maybe doesn't come from a ranch or cattle operation, what other resources would you suggest for getting involved in advocating for the beef industry?
So I would say, of course, take that beef advocacy training program. Honestly, it'll walk you through questions about beef production so that you become, very knowledgeable on what happens day to day. Another I would say is just to get in touch with your local provincial organization. So, if you send an email to Alberta beef producers and said, I'm really interested in advocating on behalf of beef producers, they have a ton of tools that they can also help you with. So they've got brochures and booklets and magnets, things that have information on hormones and antibiotics and the benefits to the economy from having an Alberta cattle industry. So that would be one of the things that I would definitely recommend.
Okay, next question. If you could do one thing to move the dial, what would it be?
That's a good question. For myself, I think the one thing I would really like to see is these graphs that compare carbon footprint of different food sources, because beef and lamb always come in as having a high carbon footprint, but that's because that takes methane calculations to carbon dioxide, which is not correct, and also overlooks all of the environmental benefits. So if I could have most people accept that carbon footprint is not equal to environmental benefits for eating beef, that would be a huge win. Yeah.
Okay. Does the fact that these materials are created by the CCA affect people's view of its credibility? Could it be viewed as kind of self-serving?
Absolutely. And so that's why, whenever we're doing these projects, we're trying to do them in collaboration with other organizations. So, when we're doing these Guardians of the Grasslands screenings, like I said, it's the Nature Conservancy of Canada or Ducks Unlimited Canada that are hosting and speaking at the event. It's not a Canadian Cattlemen's event, because then there's an obvious bias to the information. And so really relying on these third-party partners that they're speaking on behalf of the industry gives it a lot more credibility. And that event in Toronto, that's where Farm and Food Care Ontario presented the film. And CCA is taking a back seat. That's something that we're really trying to be cognizant on. And so, as we talk about these upcoming projects that we have focusing on feedlots, that's where we're really looking for these other external partners like, grocery stores or food banks, that they can share the message for us. And it's not just the beef industry talking about ourselves.
Perfect, thank you. As part of the feedlot project, could you include some research and commentary on GMO feed grains that are fed to cattle? What, if any, residual GMO in the meat, manure, so on and so forth?
That is not part of the project at this point. We aren't focusing on any GMO products at all. Right now, it is just looking at different ways that feed products are diverted to cattle. So we've been to a large carrot grower, and they talk, mostly that's not even called carrots, so it's not even the ones with bug bites or, that really have a quality issue. It's just aesthetics. So crooked carrots and carrots that don't look great end up not being purchased at farmers markets, and so they get diverted into being cattle feed. That's really, we're trying to find items that the average person would recognize as a food product, so carrots sprinkled on top of silage. and they can easily understand how that isn't being eaten by people, so it's being repurposed by cattle. That's our main focus there.
Good, thanks. Next one, what sort of opportunities are there to get students, high school and college university, involved in being a positive voice for beef production? There are many people who still may not understand the value of engaging with the consumer population.
Absolutely. So the public and stakeholder engagement team is actively working with Ag in the Classroom Canada. We work with all of their provincial organizations to, one, make sure that we've looked at all of their information specific to the beef industry and find that it fits the Canadian context and the latest research, and really supporting them in any way that we can. So we've given them, Guardians of the Grasslands as a tool for them to take into classrooms. And as well, just by promoting the video, through 4-H clubs, I've had a ton of schools screen the film. And it's been also parents that are involved in the beef industry that take it on themselves to say, I'm going to approach 10 schools in my area and ask them if they're interested in a Guardians of the Grasslands presentation and, short discussion to follow. And so they've had really great luck with that. I would also say, if you look up the Young Cattlemen's Council, I believe that's for producers that are 17 to 21. But anyway, young cattlemen, and that is a great place to get started if you're looking to start advocating and speaking with other young producers.
Okay, good. We don't have any more questions at this time. So any final words that you'd like to mention, Amie, before we close off here?
I would say that just get started. If you're not already advocating, the easiest thing to do is just start first thing tomorrow morning. If you are on farm, that's great. Start sharing just little snippets of your day to day and what happens on the farm. And if you're not, then connecting with, other organizations, learning how you can also have a voice and participate in the conversation is very important. And just want to also say thank you very much for your time, and it's very much appreciated.
Yes, thank you for your time, Amie. It was a very informative, very interesting presentation. And there's people saying just thank you as we sign off here. So just a reminder that the webinar, as it's recorded, so it will be available to you in a link on an email coming out to your way. So with that, I'm going to close off the webinar. Thanks, Amie, and everyone have a great day.